Hello everybody, welcome once again to Python with Obinkojo. Today we'll be looking at variable assignment. Without wasting much time, let's just jump into Jupyter Notebook and get our hands dirty. Right, we are right in our Jupyter Notebook. Now before we start declaring our variables, let us look at some rules that we must follow. The first rule says that we cannot start a variable name with a number. The second one says we cannot have spaces in between our variable name. And then again, by PEP 8, this is an advice. It is advisable to use lowercase throughout when you name your variables. And we need to also avoid special words in variables. And the last one is we cannot have any of these symbols, and I mean these symbols. We can have any of them in our variable name. So let's just go ahead and first of all see how we can declare variables. Now the best explanation I can give is that variable is like a container. Now let me use a scenario of our kitchen. Let's assume that we have similar containers, opaque containers that are not transparent, and they are the same color. And then in these containers, we are supposed to store different items. Let's say one is going to store pepper, one is going to store sugar, one is going to store salt, one is going to... So each container is going to be for a specific item. Now to be able to, since they are opaque and they are of the same color, to be able to easily access and know what we are looking for, it will be advisable that we go ahead and label each of these containers. And that is the best explanation I can give on variables. So variables are just like containers in which we store our data and retrieve them when we want to. So to do that, we declare a variable name. So declaring a variable name is like labeling your container. So we start by the variable name. So I can say let me just say number, and I'm going to say equal. Now this equal sign here, it's not the same as the equal sign we know, but this is called the assignment operator. So you declare your variable name, then your assignment operator, then you go ahead and put in the value. At this point we've looked at numbers, so let's just place in any number. So let me say 78. Let me run that. Let me declare another number. Let me call this number 2, and then I'm going to place a floating point value in it. That is a float, so I'm just going to say 98.6. So what is happening here is that we've created a label. So this is a container with a label called number 2, and inside this container we are assigning the value to the right. So this, we assign this value into this container called label. So anytime we want to retrieve it, if I go ahead and run this, if I type number and I run that, I get the value of number. So we remember we assigned 78 into this container that was labeled number. If I want to get access to this floating point number, I need to refer to it by the name of the variable. So I will say number 2. Number 2, and when I run that, I get the value. So this is how we declare variables. Now let's come back to the rules in naming variables. It says it cannot start with a number. So now let's try to demonstrate that and then see. I'm going to say this is one number, and I'm going to assign a value to it, and let's say 56, and I run this. Now the moment I run it says invalid decimal literal. So Python is not going to allow you in the first place. You realize that the moment I type number, the color kind of differed from the number itself. So the 1 was in green and the number was in black. So Python will not allow you to declare a variable starting with a number. Let's look at the second rule. It says that cannot have spaces. So let's try to declare a number. Let's say first name, and then I'm going to store a first name Desmond in here, and then let's run this. Now we run this and it tells us invalid syntax. So the rule applies, we cannot have spaces. And what is here? It says that we can use underscores instead. So let us try and then fix this now. So instead of in place of the space, we are going to use an underscore, and let us run it this time, and it works perfectly. So anytime you would want to have a space, just replace it with an underscore. Good. Let's go to the next one. So the next one is just a recommendation that we use lowercase throughout. So whenever you can, don't do this, name, don't do it. And the next one says we should avoid special words in Python. As simple as it is, as simple as it sounds, Python is a language which has its own syntax. It is familiar with certain words. So Python is familiar with certain words, and a typical example is float. We cannot use float because Python understands floats to be something else, so it's advisable not to use any of that. And the last one is we cannot use any of these special characters. So when you try to embed or inject any of these characters in your variable naming, let's say I want to call this name at Kwajo. So if I go ahead and say is equal to that, and I run that, I'm going to get, cannot assign the expression here. So we can't use that. We can use pound or hashtaggings as well. Hashtag, if I run that, and now what is happening is that, yeah, this is not, we can't use any of that. So just ignore any of these. So my final advice is that whenever you are naming variables, use meaningful names. Now what happens is that you need to know what you are storing in there. So if you are storing first name of someone, why don't you use first name? Because you can easily, whenever you see that variable, you will know what is stored inside. Let's assume that I use maybe name, and then inside the name I store a number. This is very deceptive. It's just like having those containers and then labeling pepper, your pepper container, labeling it onion powder. That's going to be very confused. So always make sure you stick to meaningful names when you name your variables. So that is that for variables. Thank you. We meet in the next lesson. Bye bye.